Hello again.
Thank you for coming out, as it were.
So, Michael, this is our we call this our living room. So it's very casual,
Right.
and we'll talk for a few minutes, and maybe in about 15 or 20 minutes we'll have an opportunity to take some questions from folks who were here in the audience. And as we're having this conversation and recording this podcast, we're on day 7 of the New York Film Festival, and 63 Up has not yet screened. So we won't give away any spoilers, but we will talk about your own relationship to this series and the evolution of this series. We'll talk about your own career and background and how it all started. But I was just curious, maybe just speaking more generally about this series, and I've been able to watch this terrific and really moving installment in this series, and I really hope that you will get a chance to see it this weekend. Take advantage of that standby line. I know that maybe tickets might seem sold out, but there's always a way in if you're really persistent. I really highly recommend it. And I wonder, as you're preparing for each of these installments in the Up series, how much time are you spending with the folks you're following in between, in the interim 7 years? Are you spending a lot of time with them, or is that relationship is it concentrated around kind of the filming every 7 years?
Yeah, it's been a learning process for me.
Yeah.
Is this working all right? Insofar that I don't want to get so much information that I get, I don't know, that it all sort of gets all slung together.
Yeah.
So I don't see them at all unless it's some social thing, but I don't see them in the 7 years between, because I felt it had to be focused, and it has to be focused on what they're doing in this 7th year.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if interesting things have happened to them, we'll hear about that. But I don't want it to sound like just a rundown of what's been going on in the last 6.5 years or something. It's really to find what's their state of mind at this particular moment, and what the roots for that might be, and to see the continuity of life with them. But I realized I had to control myself a bit, otherwise I'd have a 65-minute film for each person. So I've got to, as it were, sort of edit it down before I even start editing it. But we do keep in touch with them. I mean, so if anything strange happens, God forbid, or how wonderful, we would decide to do whether we want to commit to it and put it in the next film. But what I learned is that it was the most important thing was to find their attitude of mind 7 years on, as it were, not just to do highlights of the last 7 years, but to see how it altered them and what they've picked up. And so it's just every 7 years there's a kind of watermark for where they are, otherwise you get completely confused. I mean, unless it's something very powerful and unrepeatable, but generally it's calm down, Michael, you've got enough material here, just pinpoint this 7th year, and I think we've got someone else here. So I am not Michael Apted, you know that. He's around the back there. But anyway. So
you play the part well.
Yeah, good. So that's the growth of the characters and the way the characters change.
Yeah.
But that was a really big lesson for me, because you as it were, check what's going on and know, but then you don't want to, as it were, swamp people with information, like someone at 36 or someone at 38 or something like that. It's got to have the discipline of being that particular year, what's going on. And obviously, if someone's got married or had children or lost someone, then you can deal with it. But I needed to focus the thing because I knew we would have an absolute ton of material on all of them all the time. And so I've got to do a bit of kind of being a bit adult about it and deciding what bits we should be discussing. And then it got to such a state that I wouldn't even ask them things that I didn't really want to hear about unless they were so keen about it, then one does. So I had to edit it in a sense before I started, and not find out too much. So there's no surprise left for me. It's how do I keep each interview every 7 years fresh, not them running, something that they've done as part of their daily work at school or something like that. That was a bit lame, that line, wasn't it? But at school, but every 7 years has to be fresh, because we have so much material, it's ludicrous. And if you start getting into systems of this year and this year and this year, the audience will have a heart attack.
Right. Well, it would be interesting for us maybe to take a step back. There may be people in the room or others listening to this podcast who perhaps are new to this series, and so we want to give them a chance to catch up. But maybe the best way to do that would be to go back to the early 60s. And in 1964, you made a movie about 7-year-olds, and you've been revisiting these same people, many of them, you've been revisiting them every 7 years. Take us back to the origin of this project and help us understand your mindset and the approach you took for that first one, and then we'll talk about how the series, how you've evolved the series over time.
Well, I just left university in 1963, and I'd been invited with 5 other chaps and a girl my age to go and work for Granada Television in Manchester, North England. And they were a small company, but they were extremely good. And in some ways they transformed British television, and the BBC got walloped and whatever. Although this was a small company, they started bringing very, very kind of smart and knowledgeable people. Anyway, one of those people was an Australian called Tim Hewitt, who was at 29 the editor of the Northern Daily Express, which is a big yellow paper, as it were, if you understand that. And he had an idea that he wanted to make a film with 7-year-old children and to just see how different their potential upbringing is going to be. So very good. And so of the 6 that joined the company at that time, I was the only one who wanted to do documentaries. Everybody else wanted to be this, Chino Visconti and stuff like that, which of course I did as well. But I was a bit smarter sometimes. I could see that everybody wanted to be, a legend already in their time. Anyway, so I joined them. I got assigned the job of choosing the kids or finding the kids, which was, we only had 3 weeks to do it.
3 weeks.
And it was very, very, very kind of simply presented to us, that we don't know how many people you're going to be, whatever. But there was never any discussion about doing it in the long term at all. That part of the story comes later. So you can't hear me. What? Perfect. No, you can't hear me. Right. Anyway.
So it was a one-off to start with.
To disconcert you, and give my answers to you to them. Is that a better idea? Because
All
you've heard
good.
all this dribble before, haven't you? So you know. about
Not all
this.
of it.
Yeah, anyway, so.
So it was a one-off at the beginning. It was possibly a one-time only.
Yes, and also it was just go out there and get us a group of 7-year-olds who are from different backgrounds and see how different their lives are. And of course it was a shatteringly good idea, and also a very revealing idea. And in some ways it contributed to the kind of change in English society during that period. You could see how class-ridden the thing was at 7 in a ludicrous way. And so, in a sense, the earth moved. It was a famous documentary. Granada took the credit for it because it was their idea and whatever, and Tim Hewitt became kind of an important person and all that. The original film was directed by a Canadian. What's his name?
Paul Almond.
What?
Paul Almond.
Paul Almond. Sorry, Paul. Paul Almond. And the thing was that he was a documentary maker and a drama director. He was a freelance park director doing some posh plays for Granada. Anyway, so they asked him if he'd do it, and they asked me whether I would join him. Well, it became clear that I was overheated by the project and that he was under-educated about it. He hadn't a clue of the English, the English social structure, as it were. Just like I didn't have any idea of the structure of filmmaking like he did. But anyway, the point is that I, in my in my pushy way, educated him in making a documentary. And when it came out, it did in fact stir the country. The country was in shock when they saw how different the class system was and how few opposition, few obvious things that people could get weren't getting, etc. And it was truly heartbreaking. So anyway, that was that, and it created a stir, very wide stir, because it really hit people who weren't necessarily filmmakers or stuff like that. It did speak to the heart of the country. So anyway, cut to 5 years later, Paul had gone back to Canada to carry his work as a great drama director and all that, and theatre director, and they came to me to say, would you like to how do you feel about doing another version, another 7 years on? So I thought for about 0.3 seconds and said, Jesus, that's an excellent idea. So they said, oh, good. So off you go, which is what they did. And it was, it didn't, in the original one, because it didn't have any identity as such, it only had a big idea in it, but it wasn't kind of figured out too much. We had to really, in some way, start again. I think in 7-Up we probably had as many as 25 kids in it. We clearly had to, cut it down so it could be manageable. Anyway, so we moved on to that, and that was successful too. So we could see what was possible. And I remember it very well after this. I'm probably going to exaggerate to impress you.
That's just fine.
After, say, the third day of filming 7+7, I rang Granada up, because God knows where I was, somewhere with these children, and said, look, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to stay in Manchester for the rest of my life. Some of you might understand that more than others. And I said, I'll make a promise to you that if you do this, if you put this on doing it regularly for every 7 years, I'll guarantee I will be there. I said, I want to work in America and all this kind of stuff. I'm interested in making movies, blah, blah. So they said, fine, yeah, fine. And that's what happened. And I never let them down. I showed up every 7 years, although long gone were my days working there. And the whole thing turned into this. I just saw it as a great idea, and my interest in social equality came from my mother, who was the mother of 3 children, and so a husband who worked in insurance. So, but she was a socialist. I mean, she was embarrassingly socialist, my mother, and that was, her blood was in my veins, and so I picked up to this thing, and off I went, and it worked out, and it's really always worked out because it was such a good idea, and we have found a way to do it. But then the rest of the 50 years that I've been doing, it's been to refine better ways to do it and more economical ways to do it, and shoot 10,000 hours of film and then have a nervous breakdown at the thought of it. But we learned lots of lessons all the way through. I mean, I used to give them lists of questions and all that, but I stopped doing that pretty quickly. But we sort of refined it down, so it became a kind of a little scientific exercise as such. And it went on and on. And the film that you will see, is it tomorrow or today or
Saturday?
Saturday. That isn't even today or tomorrow, so Saturday. So anyway, it all worked out well. And then the other thing that sort of happened is that very slowly people got the idea, well, why don't we do it in other countries and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So we went in on and beat the grass and everything, and it's very interesting what happened, because I can't remember how many people did it, how many countries did it, but only 3 countries, including us, including Great Britain, stayed with it.
Yeah.
And I spent years figuring out why this happened. Probably wrong, but I mean, there must be a reason that only 3 particular ones survived. And the reason is, I think, they each of the 3 had a powerful underground strength to it, i.e. there was something very unique into that society that people understood and that people could react to. So you'll never guess what the 3 were. Well, one was ours, was that. One, believe it or not, was Russia.
Really?
Well, for two reasons. They've got a very fine film industry, and the guy who does it for Russia is a terrific filmmaker. But of course, they're a country that's been brutalized for hundreds and hundreds of years. So they had a lot to say about social class in Russia and all that, and theirs is extremely moving. And the last one, the 3rd one, was South Africa.
Oh, wow.
Which was a huge shock to me, because how many people were dying because of AIDS. And I thought, in my innocence, that South Africa was one of the advancing countries in it, Mandela and all this kind of stuff, but apparently not. And so they were stuck with something doing which was diminishing in numbers every time. But when you came to America, didn't work. It's a very complicated film to make and to do, because you have to have access to everything. I mean, because you might use new stuff from what's left of 7 Up when you're doing 42 Up. So you've got to have access to it, and the show business in America is so commercial and whatever that no company was still going after the first one. So the second one, and then you couldn't get the original footage. Mm-hmm. So that didn't last. I made one horrible mistake. Horrible mistake. Why didn't I do Northern Ireland? That would have been fantastic, because that went on and on and on, and was changing the whole time. Yeah. And I never saw that. I mean, I was damn clever to say other countries will be better to do it. But what happened in Northern Ireland, almost a whole generation got wiped out.
Well, you couldn't have imagined, and you said you chose these children in a matter of 3 weeks. You couldn't have imagined that you'd be choosing a relationship with folks that you would continue to this day, right?
But that would have been a country that would be marketable in terms of language, but also have been shocking. You know, whichever side of whether your politics were to the right, to the left, nonetheless, the treatment of the people and the treatment of children was horrifying. So I admit that, and I couldn't believe it when I realized what I hadn't done. Yeah. And it was too late to start it. You know, I didn't want to, I mean, it was too far gone it would be all out of sync with everybody else. But anyway, so that was my nightmare when I realized what a mistake I had made. But that makes you sympathetic towards me, doesn't it? So.
It does. Do you remember how you chose, or what drew you to some of these children you chose at age 7?
Yeah, I mean, no. I mean, I just think it was their ease with me.
Right.
I don't mean that they were necessarily poets or anything like that, but you could see people who would talk to me about stuff. You know, and had a kind of vision of the world slightly beyond the narrowness of, 7 Up. That was all. And it was mainly the fact that I chose them if I felt they could stand the stress of it, of having to do it, and also whether, there was possibility that there would be a certain continuity in their life, whatever, which I could. Which would be juicy for me, as it were. Yeah. So they were, in with families who were ambitious, or the complete reverse of ambitious, or whatever. But basically, it was who was good at talking in front of me, and maybe up to, whether you've got the crew and all this to, 15, 20 people. Yeah. And most of them did. I mean, we didn't make any changes in it after 14 Up. So we did. I mean, I made horrible mistakes. I mean, the women thing. I'm surprised you women in the audience haven't been throwing fucking knives at me already. We didn't see it. I mean, we weren't idiots, but we didn't see how quickly that whole thing changed. How so quickly women became important in the society. I only had 4 women of the 14, so I had to kind of balance it all up by using the wives as people who were wives of the children to bring them in. So I tried to increase the female attendance, as it were, as people got older and became attached to the original ones, and they gave me some good stuff, but that was a mistake.
It comes up. It's a mistake. If it's a mistake, it's a mistake that you address directly in the work. Yeah. You're transparent about the engagement you have with a specific subject, and it comes up again in this film. Who calls you out for that? Was that something that was difficult?
Definitely, yeah, and called me out pretty quickly. I mean, It wasn't like 40 years later that we discovered that there were women as well. Oh, good Lord. We began to feel it at about 21, and then I had to start, bringing it in as a family, which isn't a horrible idea, but I mean, it was embarrassing that we missed how quickly that happened. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen quickly in every country, but it did happen quickly in up to a point in Great Britain.
Well, it is interesting to watch over the course of the series how we can talk more broadly about a number of social issues or political changes, certainly, that happen, and a number of your subjects talk about that, and certainly in the new film, again, without giving too much away, there's certainly Brexit to grapple with as a recent development in in your country, and that's something that to pin a conversation around, of course, as well. I wonder, I wanted to go back for 1 minute before we take some questions from the audience, and that is, you talked about your parents, and you talked about your upbringing. When and why did you decide to take that upbringing and direct it towards film or television?
Well, I grew up in the golden age of films, really. I mean, I didn't discover American films until the 70s, pretty much. But I mean, European cinema was alive and well in England. Yeah. England's output for movies wasn't sensational, but when you look at what the French, the Germans, the Italians, blah blah, what we're doing, they were part of the kind of, as it were, without being arrogant, the upper culture. We're looking at all these films, Indian films and whatever, and so you could just see the range of it and the numbers of people who can make beautiful movies and whatever, or tough movies or whatever. So, it was happening around us, and we were way behind. And then I think what gave the whole thing a kick in the pants was really the Ken Loach, Tony Garnett school, of his stuff. This stuff was terrific and original, and came out of Italy, I suppose, Nouvelle Vague in France and whatever, and it was so exciting. And television was getting better, and so there was a great kind of upscale now in the work that documentaries could do. More people were seeing them and whatever, so that it was, it was a kind of rich and uncovered area, and particularly politically with Granada and Tim Hewitt. I mean, those guys really did push it forward, using very intimate things to talk about, and not to shame or shock the general public. They didn't all go and jump in the sea after seeing it and wish they were dead. But nonetheless, you could see the opening of a kind of openness, really, from people who were prepared to talk and people were prepared to listen, and it wasn't just kind of lewd or anything like that. And people were prepared to, announce and discuss what was going on and what wasn't good, and so there was definitely a hunger for more information.
Yeah.
People were prepared to talk about it in public, and it happened very quickly. And it really was Granada got it going, and Hewitt got it going, and then the BBC quickly got onto it, and then by that, as it went on, then all the other companies. So it was really in television, and of course there was also a lot of theatre at that time, which was also, but I mean that wasn't really a national cultural thing. I mean it became it, but it was originally a kind of, a kind of narrow thing, but it got bigger and bigger and bigger. So people's idea of entertainment with a capital E sort of changed, and social, social pressures and things like that became a reason for discussing important things on television, which would never have to been discussed before.
I wonder, as I'm watching, as a teaser for what people will see on Saturday, in this latest edition, in this 63 Up, we see these subjects certainly reflecting on, looking back at their lives from a particular vantage point. And again, we see the intersection of the impact of social issues, whether it's Brexit or other things happening in the world. And I wonder to what extent, as you look at, when you sit down to tell the story and to put the story together, it's really moving, but it's also something that I wonder about your own self-reflection and how you think about your own career your own relationship to each of these subjects and the passage of time.
Yeah, I mean, I just put that down to luck and to being in the right place at the right time. If I'd gone to the BBC rather than Granada, I think I would have disappeared into another program. But because there was something in me about social science and stuff like that, and I read law as a university course, I was tuned in to what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So that was a piece of luck. But once it all started, then it all happened very, very quickly.
Yeah.
In newspapers and everything, people started talking about the reality of life and not just people's dreams and whatever. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You look unpersuaded by that.
No, I've only I rewatched it. I rewatched it today to prepare for our conversation, and I think the second time watching it, it was even more emotional for me. Right. Just thinking about the passage of time and what's changing in the lives of the subjects that you've covered. There's some dramatic things that happen in many of their lives, and it's really moving and it's emotional as well.
And I sort of like to think that I was always, because I read a lot as a child and all that I was only really interested, whether it's drama or books, in emotion. Yeah. So, I wasn't so much interested in the facts of people's life, but the emotional way in which they told their story. And the more I could get out of these children at the beginning, and they did very well, and I had a sympathetic voice for them, I wasn't trying to poke into their lives, but that was really from my mother. I was never really a political. I never ran for election or something like that. But, I was very, very interested in people talking and being, prodded a bit. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a lesson. And I wasn't that as interested to be scandalous and to see how many of them were homosexual or anything like that. Yeah. I was more interested in the deeper emotions of how people respond to things. And I think that helped keep it going. So it was never, if you look at the old ones, they're not bogged down by just certain things that happened in that time. There was just an attitude towards them that I wanted to hear their emotions, and I would push them for that. And I think, that was always my interesting. I wasn't interested so much in the journeys of the political parties and all that, because that was pretty alarming. But it was, the substance of what people talked about and what people were interested in.
Yeah. I was thinking today also about, this is a sort of tangential more about the craft of it, but also just the material. I noticed even more profoundly the different looks of the films from the different years, using different film stocks over time. So I'm thinking about how just the medium that you're capturing these conversations in has changed and evolved.
And that worked in my favor, although when people started just shooting on videotape and things like that, and all the aesthetes in the business think, oh my God, you lose all the poetry of photography, which you certainly did. But from where I stood, the fact that I could talk for an hour to people on video without stopping. I remember in the first 3 or 4 of them, the tapes ran for about sort of 30 minutes or something. So people were hitting me on the shoulder after about, you couldn't get anything going. But once then you could roll for an hour, and you could create kind of an intimacy with the person. That was a huge gift, although, purists would say, quite rightly, that there's a poetic element missing from early video than there should have been, but it was catching up, and the fact that you could roll for an hour and not stop, that was a huge thing.
Yeah. I'd love to switch gears, Michael, and ask, or give our audience the opportunity to ask you.
They're all asleep.
A question. They're definitely not asleep. And if we have a mic, we have 2 microphones, so let's just wait so that those listening on the podcast will have a chance. We'll start on this side, have a chance to hear your question. So we'll start there. Yes, thank you. Hi.
Hi, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed your series over all of these years. One of the things that has struck me in seeing a few of the earlier ones is that I would assume you set out to record their lives, but you've shaped their lives in so many ways. The kind of anger at you that I've seen, and the emotion at kind of talking about this, and probably the feelings it brings up for them. It forces them to look back at what were their dreams and what are their realities. And so would you just comment on how much this experience shaped them rather than just recorded who they were?
No, I mean, it was, I think part of the instinct of my job was not to move them across. I mean, I might say to them something general about politics and they weren't interested in it at all, which I might then follow that up. But I think for each of them, I felt all of them as individuals, and I would go for that individuality, rather than have each of them answer the same pictures as same questions. I mean, as it developed and they developed, my attitude towards them and what was interesting about them changed. So it was I never wanted it to be, like an exam. Everybody has to do an answer about politics or whatever. So I was always wise to the fact that people are different and have different values and whatever, and to keep that alive, not try and sort of cover that up. And that's, in a way, what became easier for me technically when I could shoot on video and shoot tons of stuff. I could cover lots of ground and not have to say, well, I'm only going to be able to shoot at least at the most an hour and a half, so I better cut it down before I even shoot it too. So I think that was a big help for me. It made me generous about what I could talk about and use subjects, even if I had an idea that someone was hiding something for me. I had the space to explore it with them. But I never wanted it to look like everybody looked the same. I was always looking for what their dreams were, what their ambitions were, and whatever. And so, when I got better at the job, and also the technology got better. If it wasn't aesthetically better, but it was better able to give a stronger coverage and to pick out the unique things in each of the person, rather than just have, say, 25 questions and that's that.
Thank you. We'll go right here and then we'll move over. Hi.
Thanks. You spoke of serendipity and timing of your birth and the rise of a golden age of filmmaking. You've dealt in both the narrative type of filmmaking as well as documentary filmmaking. But in a documentary filmmaking world, have you had a chance to cross-pollinate with other documentary filmmakers? Are you aware of a culture of documentary filmmakers that sort of exchange juices and energies, and who would those people be?
I think so. I mean, not to the extent that I know about foreign directors who direct dramatic work, because documentaries can be sometimes very intimate and very personal and very significant in a short way, and I wouldn't feel happy that I get the best out of it if I didn't understand the language. And I mean, I've done some films, with foreign. I did a couple about art and things like that, and we went to this, I chose 6 artists all over the world and made a film a bit like this, but only did it once. And I came across a brilliant architect in Japan, whose name I now forgotten, very famous. Anyway, we had this very seemed to be contentious conversation. And I thought he was angry with me and all this kind of stuff. So when we got back, the interpreter, who was English, whose one great claim was that she, I don't know which prime minister she worked for, but someone who thought, I think she should have done better than that. But anyway, he wasn't being remotely, he was being aggressive and helpful. And because of his attitude, which was just his nature, and it was a horrible shock. I've forgotten what his name was, but I mean, he was, I'll try and think of it, but, you know, so I mean, I just felt that dealing in a foreign language, because I don't have any gift for language at all, I never did, you know, I should kind of keep things under control so that I only do films about something I know about, or what I know about, or know what the issues are. So I don't, unless somehow it can be translated on, I thought it was a kind of foolish thing for me to be doing, because there's so much nuance in doing documentaries that unless you get that nuance, you probably miss the story, and boy did I miss him. And he was very, very cross about it, and who could blame him, but anyway.
Sort of as a follow-up to your question, I wonder if, Michael, if you've thought about how over the span of your making just this particular series, the documentary form has evolved, not to even start talking about the nature of reality television, which really didn't exist in its current form at the time that you started doing this. But have you thought about the way that perhaps the form has evolved, how that's influenced you, or how you've influenced that form?
Well, I mean, I think I'm making a narrow point, but it is a crucial one, that if you can't understand the nuance of someone's answering your questions, then you're in deep trouble. And that was me, and I didn't even realize I was in deep trouble. And then when I heard the translated version of it, it was embarrassing. You know, I missed points and misunderstood answers, and I mean, it was so Ando, Tadeo Ando. Do you remember? Do you know him? Are you Japanese? Yeah, well, it was him. And he was young. I mean, he was a young bloke, and very, very gifted and all this. And I was so embarrassed when, you know, I saw his stuff and put his stuff together, and I thought how trite it was. And it was entirely my fault, because I didn't really know enough about him to get some sort of controversial stuff, because he was a very controversial architect. I mean, his body of work was remarkable. So anyway, so that answers that. But
Are we to understand that your inspiration comes from a certain amount of challenge or contest from the other side, as it were? Do you thrive in a challenging type of situation?
well, not if I'm not going to understand it. I don't want to be so ambitious that, you know, I take them from all continents of the world and then just look an idiot. So I think to get the best out of documentaries, you know, unless they're very visual documentaries, you know, and then the art is in. I mean, if I was to do film about football, for example, you know, I would know what to talk about, even if I didn't speak a word of the language that the footballer had. But when you're talking about kind of intellectual or emotional things, and you're going at it, and you really feel you're not understanding what they're talking about, it's embarrassing. So I did cut myself down after that, because I thought that was an embarrassing effort.
Let's take a question right there. Hi.
Hi, thank you. I love the film so much. I'm just wondering, having observed these people over the years, is there one story that you're most moved by, or people's changes that you've seen that you find most,
Yeah.
inspiring or moving?
Well, that's a bit of a trick question. Not that you're trying to catch me out, but it's true of all of them. I mean, the changes, it's like watching your children grow up, and the little things they pick up from me or from their mothers and all that sort of stuff. It's the way people are changing, and because there's only sort of 13 of them, 14 of them, it is remarkable how people change, and also remarkable how people don't change. How what you get out at 14, you're still going to get out at 49 or something like that. But I mean, it is interesting to push them and to see how genuine some of the stuff is by going back into the old films and showing them a bit of them and say, well, this was you 21 years ago. What do you think of it now? So it's difficult because you do want to see what's so interesting for an audience is see how people change, how people get to where they are in the current film and how they got there. So you've got to be aware of the passing of time. You can't just say, oh my goodness, it's a big difference since 35 up and 49 up and stuff like that. You need to be able to go back over things, especially things. I mean, I always look at the films before I go back onto the next generation of them, just to see what I thought when I did it. What wasn't quite right, what didn't sound good, and all that. And so I may cover that ground again, because then it's very interesting for an audience to see how these people can drop some stuff, and move on with other stuff. So you have to kind of keep an attachment to the development of it as well as to keep it fresh, so everybody doesn't suddenly become a Nazi or something like that. Do you know what I mean? That's a pretty tasteless remark, but give me that one. It's to get the balance between it being fresh and also being a surprise and also being predictable. You have to try and keep all those things in one's head.
Michael, does looking at when you go back and watch these films, as you said, you're preparing for the next one, and dealing with that passage of time, you're looking at, as you said, how your subjects are evolving, how they're changing. In what ways are you thinking, or in what ways have these films influenced the way you think about your own passage of time? How have they changed you from film to film, or from decade to decade?
Well, very much so, and also my children too. I was incredibly interested talking to these people, how they brought their children up and all that. I was thinking, oh my God, why didn't I do that, and all that sort of stuff. So it's as long as you've got an open mind and prepared to embarrass yourself, it's incredibly interesting, and that's what's so popular, I think, and unique about this series of films, because everybody can recognize the changing and all that sort of stuff. Now with all this technology, you can have all of them, lucky old you, all on the kitchen table, off you go.
Yeah.
So, to give people that breadth of their own passage of time,
Right.
even if they think it was a load of rubbish, they can't kill it all.
Right.
They certainly did say that when they were 14, and you might regret it, but you did say it.
Yes. Let's go right here to the center, and then the front row.
So the series was originally conceived to highlight differences in class.
Yeah.
So would you say now at 63 up that it has achieved its goal? And also, besides class, what's the second most impressive thing that you find it highlights?
I didn't understand that last bit. Sorry.
Well, just besides class,
Yes.
what else do you really notice? What are the themes that you pick up, either in 63 up or in 56 up, over the years, besides that, the main goal of class?
Well, I just think it's a genuine openness that we have. It's not all valuable or even all agreeable, but the fact that people know much more now than they ever did, when you think of, which is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's terrific, know these things about people, but I just think the breadth of the knowledge and the breadth of what people are prepared to talk about can only be helpful, I think. I mean, people who kind of lock themselves away and all that, and then, because on the whole we didn't make too many horrible mistakes. And I don't mean in guessing things and whatever, but the way that the thing moved along in each person wasn't too far off, if you know what I mean. We had to make adjustments and all that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of people changed dramatically, but because I did them every 7 years, it was visible. You didn't say, oh my God, what happened to him? And I mean, if that was something strange, then you could nail it between the last one and this one, then you've got something concrete. And the fact that I can show them at all those different ages within the program also helps, that I can, it's not telling people to reminisce, it's telling people to say what they really did say when they were 21 years old about girls or something like that, So it's just a great thing to have. And although I speak incredibly warmly at Granada, it's horrifying how much stuff they threw away. Oh my God. I mean, they didn't show anything that was broadcast, but they threw everything else out, right up to 28, for God's sake. I had all these thousands of feet of thing on tape and everything, and then when I went back to when I was, say, doing 56 up, and I went back to see what they had said about something else, all that was available was the transmitted program, which was, since it was such a brilliant idea that they had, I didn't have the idea, I was shocked, how much stuff they threw out. And especially ridiculous when you were dealing on tape, when it was nothing. So that was disappointing. And I remember things that people said, and then when we looked for it, it wasn't there, and we think, oh my God, they've wiped it. Nothing that was ever broadcast was wiped, but I know that I had a big set too with one of these people, and where is it? Where's it gone? It was just what was left of it was in the transmitted program, but the arguments or the rows or the emotional moments were removed. Wow. So I nearly cried. I was very upset. Wow. No, you're looking too serious.
I'm upset. I'm upset to hear it. It's over.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're saving everything now.
Well, yes, but it's a bit late now because it's what you wanted when they were 35 and stuff like that. You want it all because no one else has ever got this, I don't think.
Yeah.
And no one else has gone this deep into the time of someone's life.
There was a question in the front, and I think it was it here? Yes, hi. I think you might be our last question.
Following up on the earlier questions about the evolution of the people, one of the early themes was, show me the child at 7 and I'll show you the man.
Yes.
And that was true of a remarkably high number of them at 21 and 28.
Yeah.
What would you say about them today? Is it still true of a lot, or have they mostly changed and are different people than they were?
I think I would say, I wouldn't really know, but I do think people have changed a lot. Society is much more mobile. Information is much more available and whatever. I think people have access to the world and other things. And so I think, when you look at, if you look at, the radio times or the TV times 10 years ago, it's pretty shocking how narrow some of it is when you look about, and now the impact of international television and all that kind of stuff. So I think people get more educated by watching television, I mean, and whatever. So I think, I think it's been an enormous help to people grasp their parts, their past, not their parts, Michael, their, what they lived through and all that. I mean, it's so graphically delivered now, so well delivered, and you just have more material, which really defines the changes of society and the changes of people. Is that all right? Yeah, okay.
We're wrapping up, but I have one burning question that I can't quite shake, and I'll just ask it this way. Have you thought about how this series should conclude?
By my death. Well, that may not be. I mean, other people could take it.
That's where I'm wondering.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I mean, it's getting a little hair-raising now.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, there is some illnesses around.
Yeah.
All that. For those of you who've seen, 63 up.
Yes.
There's a definite hint of mortality there.
Yes.
And we had to deal with one mortality, which was very upsetting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you don't want to put people's noses through it. I mean, supposing 5 of them had died, and I wasn't one of them. For 6 years' time, it would be tricky to know. But I suppose you have to do it. You have to.
Yeah.
If you act by the sword, then you die by the sword. If I'm going to be very aggressive about it and then if people pass away, then I can't ignore it, can I? And that gets very, very painful because I have known them a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
And although I don't see them much, we're very close,
Yeah.
And one dreads, the odd phone call saying, well, I might not be around for blah, 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 and all that, but I haven't had that yet. I mean, one person died after 56 up, but we haven't had a torrent yet of demise. But it's a dreadful fault for me because it's not exactly family, but Christ, I mean, I see more of them in their past than I see of my family.
Yeah.
I've forgotten what my children were like when they were 14 or 21, but there's these other people. My God, look what they were like. And anyway, I won't go on about it, but it's a bit of a problem, emotional problem for me, and I don't want to skirt it. And I think if people would be very annoyed if one did say, oh, well, they're dead, and oh, they're dead, they're still alive.
Yeah.
Now, this one, by chance, is, whatever, anyway.
Well, look, it's on Saturday. I really hope that anyone who doesn't have a ticket makes the effort to get there or see it at another opportunity, at another festival or anywhere else. It's a really special opportunity for us to sit with you for this conversation. I appreciate it, and thank you for coming back and sharing this movie with the New York Film Festival. Thank you, Michael.